this is a panel about E.T., but a couple of months ago, we lost the great Dabney Coleman. So for a second, it's going to become a cloak and dagger panel. For just a second, I got to ask Henry what he remembers about working with the late, great Dabney Coleman.
Oh, well, he was a fantastic actor and a great guy. He was, I don't think he really wanted to be there.
What, in San Antonio?
In San Antonio and working on Cloak and Dagger because, you know, he was at odds with the director. They kind of went at it quite a bit, you know, like behind the scenes. But yeah, I had a great experience with him, and Cloak and Dagger was special for me because that was after E.T. and the success of E.T., of course. Universal was like, well, let's cater this to you. And then they kind of set it in San Antonio, which was my hometown. So I got to work in my hometown for the first and only time in my career, which was great. Yeah, but I have great memories about it.
I have a quick Dabney Coleman story. I was doing a play, and I never worked with the man. I was doing a play in New York, down in the Village, shortly after E.T. came out. And I was right around the corner. The theater I was doing it, I was right around the corner from the Cherry Lane Theater in the Village. And so I was in a bar. I was underage, but I was in a bar. And right before my play, you know, I had about an hour before I was supposed to get ready and everything. And Dabney Coleman rushes in and he goes, "Where's the theater? The theater, the theater in the neighborhood." And I chimed up and I said, "Oh, you mean Circle Repertory? It's just like right on 7th Avenue, right across from the Village Cigars." He said, No, not that theater. The one Ed Herman's doing the play at. That's my Dabney Coleman. I got so excited. Dabney Coleman's coming to see me. No, not that one. So, that's my story.
I wish I had a Dabney Coleman story.
Oh, I know.
I saw Tootsie once.
9 to 5.
9 to 5 was great.
9 to 5 was great.
There is an extraordinary alchemy among you as a family. And how many times have we seen movies where it's like, those people aren't really a family. You know, that's not really I mean, obviously we know. But what in E.T., there's such an easy rapport. It struck a chord with people so dramatically because it said, that could be our family. And I wonder if you can speak to sort of the casting process and if you were doing chemistry reads back then or it was just, how did that all work that it just,
we barely got to read the script. That's how it worked back then.
Yeah.
There was so much secrecy going on because people were stealing ideas. So, no, Robert will probably correct me, but we didn't all meet each other till right before first day, right?
Right. Yeah. You and I didn't, but Robert had been a part of. Robert had been a part of a preliminary casting that had happened. Like you did some chemistry reads. And
They did do one of my auditions was a game of Dungeons and Dragons. And they sort of had people that were not really cast, but they were trying to see chemistry amongst the guys that played my friends in the movie. And some of them were the actors that ended up in the movie, Tom Howell and a couple others. And it was a Dungeons and Dragons game at Harrison Ford's house. And he was filming Blade Runner. And so I remember...
Because the writer of E.T. was married to Harrison Ford.
Yeah, so it was at her house, really, but it was his house, and that's what I was excited about. And it was neat because he was a carpenter. He quit acting for a brief time, and he was a carpenter, so he had made all the furniture in his living room and everything. And it was basically, I showed up, and Stephen was there, Kathy Kennedy, and Melissa, and Harrison Ford was getting out of the shower and on his way out the door, because I guess he was filming Blade Runner at the time. But so we had a Dungeons and Dragons game. I remember Elvis Costello was playing. He had an album out called Trust. And when I showed up, they were playing the Elvis Costello album. And so I know, they were kind of fans of him. So there was that, but as a family, we only had a very brief time together.
Yeah. And you don't usually, get together with your other actors. Maybe if you're lucky, you have a table read, but everybody's cast pretty much separately.
I do have a brief story about when Henry. I don't know if you remember this, but it was. We were meeting with Stephen, and he was all excited, and he was saying, "There's going to be toys." Yeah, Henry doesn't like this story. So he's like,
So of course he's going to tell it. You see.
So he was all excited. He's going, yeah, there's going to be E.T. toys. There might even be toys of you guys made. You know, Henry was 10, so he had all his Star Wars toys. And he said, so I could say to my mom, I'm going to go up to my room and play with myself. And you know the laugh that Dee does when it's so inappropriate when he says penis breath? That exact laugh came out of Dee. And I was suppressing a laugh myself. But it was so innocent. He was so innocent, and he just said it so innocently.
Merritt, you were
He loves
also
to tell that story.
I love to tell it. It's true.
Merritt, you were awfully young when you got cast as well as in the role of playing E.T.
I was.
You old.
And I wonder, obviously, this is something that would probably today go to a stunt person. And you hadn't had a ton of experience doing anything like this. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience of getting involved with this incredible project?
Oh, sure. Well, I was 11, and it was my first job, so it's not something I'm going to say no to. That's for sure. I wasn't a great student, and I hated school, so I loved that they just plucked me out of school and put me on the set of E.T. So basically, though, I wasn't part of the cast. I was part of the special effects crew. So everybody was
Not in our eyes.
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a salary issue or something like that, you know? But anyway, so Universal Studios contacted UCLA Medical Center, where I used to go for rehabilitation, because they wanted to see how I was going to be able to get around, either with a wheelchair or skateboard or on my hands. And while we were working that out, Universal Studios called UCLA and got in touch with my old doctor, and they said they might have some short people, but this guy who has no legs walks on his hands, and he might be able to work for the part. So they set up an audition for me to go down to Carlo Rambaldi's studio. Carlo Rambaldi is the guy who designed E.T. He's a master craftsman when it comes to effects. He did King Kong, Alien. He did the head for Alien. A lot of people think it was just Geiger, but Carlo Rambaldi actually figured out the mechanics in the alien head that would make it look menacing.
How to make the teeth come out of the mouth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So when I first went into Carlo Rambaldi's studio, he had a stairway that was going up to the attic with all the old creatures, and the alien head was right there. So that was like iconic to me. The alien frightened me. When I went to when I saw it in the theater, I embarrassed my parents because I couldn't make it past the chest burster scene. And then later on, I don't know if you remember, but like in '85, we got together to watch Alien, and I was shielding my eyes.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't make it past. I still couldn't, and you were like breaking my balls for it. You're like, dude, how old are you?
In fact, I was going to ask if you want to go see the new one, because the new one's great.
Uh-huh. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, who do you think would win in a fight, E.T. or the alien?
If E.T. had like those cool-ass shotguns or machine guns, I think he could win.
Aliens couldn't fly.
True.
But not if he had a walkie-talkie.
And E.T.'s all about love.
That's true. but love can defeat an alien. Aliens love you a little too much.
Speaking of love, Dee, I want to ask you, obviously you work on projects sometimes and you think, oh, this is going to be great and it's terrible. You work on something you think this is going to be terrible and it's great. You knew from the beginning that E.T. was something special, didn't you, when you read that script?
Yeah, I had to go over to the studio. They literally locked the door while I read the script. And I called my agent and said, I don't know how much this is going to do for me, but I think it's going to do a lot for the world, and I want to be a part of it. And I was right, wasn't I? Yeah.
So W.C. Fields very famously said that he didn't like to work with children, animals. I think he probably would have added aliens if that were an option.
Well, I wouldn't have had a career, would I?
Exactly. You walk onto that set, you're surrounded by children.
Yeah.
And they're all great, of course. But what was that like for you? Did that add anything to the look, walking out into a set and being in front of the camera, it always has its stresses, but then, you got these
I
guys.
don't look at it that way at all. I look at it as fun. I mean, it's kind of serious fun, but do you look at it as stressful when you're shooting?
I don't
look
work
at
with
it
kids.
that way. But I
Refuses.
I love working with kids and I love working with dogs, so here I am. Can I say? They were fabulous. I mean, you really didn't have to direct them. Stephen would throw out an idea and they'd just run with it. Even Drew, who was, what, 4?
I think it was like
6.
6.
6?
Yeah.
At the
We always know each other's ages because we know in our relation. I know he was always 10, I was 14, so we always know
How old was I?
You're as young as you are now.
You were 20. You were in
29.
your 20s.
Oh, did you hear that
You
save?
were always one of the gang.
I love you for that. Thank you.
For Henry and Robert, it was very early, obviously, in your careers. You're very young. Were you familiar at all? You were just learning the ropes of the industry. That Spielberg was already this legendary figure, having done Jaws, Raiders, 1941. But what was sort of your Close Encounters? What was your feeling when you went up for it and then got cast? And this young guy, speaking of young, I mean, this really young director with all this energy. What was your impression of the picture and him, if you can recall that way back then?
Yeah, I mean, I think, he was already a well-known, hot Hollywood name. But, he was a director that people would drop everything for to be part of his project. So it really was a big deal to be cast in the role. But I had seen Raiders of the Lost Ark that summer, and I was really excited to meet the guy that directed Raiders of the Lost Ark. I wasn't thinking about much else at 10 years old. In fact, when I met Stephen the first time, I had gone to Six Flags with my cousins in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I purchased a bullwhip, which I wore on my belt, at the meeting, And I was disappointed because he didn't really even notice it. He just kind of glanced down, and I was on the set of Poltergeist to have an initial meeting with him, and that's how I met Stephen. It was during the scene in Poltergeist where they're digging the pool, and Jo Beth Williams is being assaulted by the coffins and stuff emerging from this pool, and there was rain towers and lots of mud and water. And Stephen was in a yellow slicker with a straw cowboy hat, 70s kind of feather headband.
He always wore
thing.
that, too.
And he just came out, and it happened in about 30 seconds. He was like, "Oh, hey, kid, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I'd like you to read for me tomorrow. I'm going to meet with you. But great to see you." And then he left, and I was like, wow, he didn't even say anything about the bullwhip. And
He sees it all the time.
he sees it all the time, yeah.
Yeah, Poltergeist was supposed to be Stephen's big film that year. E.T. was this little thing that kind of got thrown in between everything.
Didn't he wrote the story, or did he write the script for Poltergeist? So it was really his idea, but then he couldn't have two movies coming out from the same, so he couldn't direct it because he couldn't have two movies coming from different studios in the same summer.
I don't know.
I
He
think that
tried
was
to
the
direct it, though.
circumstances.
He and Toby kind of tussled
Yeah.
over that one.
Yeah, he and Toby didn't get along.
Yeah, Tobe Hooper, who directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was the original director of Poltergeist, but it was kind of, Stephen had his hand in every aspect of all the films. that he
Literally,
worked.
it's his hands. When you see the guy's face getting peeled off, those are Stephen's hands.
Yeah.
So literally, he had his
He had
hands
his hands in it. See what I did?
In
See
the
what
movie.
I did there?
See what I had to put up with.
See, that's
For
what I was
3
asking.
months, I had to.
But
And
my
what about
meeting
you?
with Stephen, I was Close Encounters was my favorite film at that time. So Raiders hadn't come out yet, so it was the day President Reagan got shot was my first meeting with Stephen. I was so nervous because he was my favorite director. My favorite film was Close Encounters, and within a minute of talking to him, I forgot about all that because he has this enthusiasm that people, I've seen it happen with a bunch of people, you know, when we were filming on the set in the neighborhood, people would approach him and he was approachable and they'd be nervous and tongue-tied, and he has just this thing where you might not get what he's so enthusiastic about, but, you know, you'll be less nervous.
Yeah, no, when I met him, I think he could just assume that I was like in an Atari and video games, and so he asked me what my favorite video game was, and I told him it was Yar's Revenge on the Atari 2600, and we just talked for 20 minutes about how awesome that game was. It was his favorite game, and so he obviously tried to consciously connect with me on something that we had in common.
He played Dungeons and Dragons with us one time. I got Henry into Dungeons and Dragons, and he stopped by when it was a rain delay or something like that. We were filming and
we were in Crescent City. We were
Yeah.
doing all the, you know, like in the third act, like all the forest stuff with E.T. and when you find him when he's sick and
Yep.
in the river.
Sick E.T.
Yeah.
How come there's no doll of sick E.T.? There's every other.
I'm sure you
There's
can get
drunk
custom.
E.T.
There's a
There's
market for
E.T.
that.
in drag.
It's
No,
there's-
that's a great
It's off
idea.
brand.
Sure.
There's no
It's off
sick
brand
E.T. doll.
E.T. Yeah.
I mean, we're at horror conventions, and I see everything under the sun, and nobody's made a sick E.T. I guess it's just a bridge too far.
Nobody
Sacrilege.
cosplays Sick E.T. either.
I know. There's no. Yeah.
There's
what
an
the
opportunity
heck?
out there, people. So
Yeah, like wheeling
So
him
take it.
around on a gurney. You know,
Oh man,
that's
no,
a-
I've
that's
never
actually a
seen
great
it.
idea.
Yeah, you could have a whole triage set up.
Yeah,
this was
The cosplay triage. E.T.
nobody's done it.
Nobody's done it yet.
Okay,
So-
don't steal that idea.
When everybody had to wear masks, nobody thought of that as a cosplay.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Big hazmat thing on.
Our talents are wasted. Our talents are
So-
wasted.
I would have Henry sign the thing the coffin that he's in, you know, filled with the dry ice.
Oh yeah,
You would
it's like the
you could
milk
sign
crate.
it.
That
Yeah.
thing.
So at the risk of asking a question, so there's meeting Stephen, and then there's working with Stephen. So I worked with him once as a writer on a project, and you know he's always talked about film differently than any human I have ever spoken to about film, because when he talks about it, he talks about your experience as though he's sitting where you are, and that's what he's feeling when things are happening on screen. But that's as a writer. When you're taking direction from him, what's that process like to be standing in front of him, sitting with him? You know, is it
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like working with any other director that knows what they do.
Awesome.
You know, Stephen, he's very childlike, especially when he worked with the kids. You know, he got into the toy, but there's not this mystique that everybody has about him when you work with him. He's just kind of down on your level, really. And he would throw out directions, especially for the kids, to take them off guard, you know, and not set them up and rehearse them so much. Stephen knew exactly what he wanted to do, and yet he was open to whatever magic would happen in the moment. The end of the dinner table scene where Henry says, you know, my husband's in Mexico with Sally. Well, Mary, the character, felt all these tears coming up and thought, oh, I don't want my kids to see me cry. So I got up and left. And Stephen, after they came over, and he said, Dee, that's not in the script. Why did you do that? And I told him what happened to Mary. He looked at me for 2 beats, turned around and said to all his guys, you've got 30 minutes, build a wall over here on the kitchen set. I need a sink with running water. So he could take me from the table over to that sink and bring me back into that big close-up where I say he hates Mexico.
That's amazing, because what blows my mind about that story is that that scene, that moment in the film, to me, is the moment that sets up the entire theme of the movie, and it finally gets paid off at the very end, right? It's like Mike has the line, and it's like, you know, you got to learn other people have feelings, you know? And then at the very end of the movie, when you're saying goodbye to E.T., and you're down there on your knees, and you got your arms out, I mean, Stephen very brilliantly cuts to you dropping to your knees with your arms out, mimicking what's happening. The entire film is about empathy. It actually makes my brain explode that was a moment that, but I love the fact that it was a moment that came from your inspiration as an actor.
Yeah, and I think.
But sorry, Dee.
No, go ahead.
But that's the brilliance of a good director who's able to recognize these moments and incorporate them and not get stuck to a plan or something that he's laid out before, to where he's blind to the magic and the lightning in the bottle moment, right? Because that was part of the fun of working with Stephen always, was that he was willing to let you kind of go off and do something, and if it was good, he would keep it, and if it was not, then he would throw out another idea, and some of these were never in the script in the first place, but
Also, it should be noted
Lots.
that Melissa, the screenwriter, was on the set every day,
Yeah.
and she was working with us, the kids, very closely, and taking our ideas. We weren't, changing lines or anything like that, but we could make suggestions to her. What if we say it like this, or So she was working with us along with Stephen.
And it was important to Stephen not to demystify E.T., especially to the young cast. What was that like, trying to keep the idea that E.T. is not just a Carlo Rambaldi creation, but there's a reality to him? How was
that was mainly for Drew, because Drew was 6, and the veil of reality and fantasy hadn't quite been lifted, so Drew would wrap a scarf around E.T.'s neck before we went to lunch, because the soundstage was cold, things like that. And
They didn't let me see it.
Go over and E.T. would be sitting in a corner, between shots, and she would just go over and be talking to him. And so Stephen finally assigned 2 guys to stay on E.T. to keep him alive whenever Drew came over to talk to him.
It's inspired.
And they didn't let, we filmed somewhat in sequence once we got to the studio, and the scene where I see him for the first time, they wouldn't let me see the actual working model. All I had seen was the first week of filming was the bike chase. So all I had seen was the thing they had rigged up in the basket, and as soon as I showed up, my heart sank, because I was like, oh, great. This thing looks so fake. Because it was all wrapped up, because it had to be not heavy so that it wouldn't tip the bike over. So they tried it with the actual working one that had all the machinery, but Henry just fell right over.
yeah, it was something like 40 pounds in the milk crate on the front handlebars, and at 10 years old, it was impossible.
You were about 40 pounds.
And I was about 40 pounds. Yeah. No, but it was impossible for me to do it. So if you look, like my bike double, like suddenly Elliot's thighs go from like this to like
So
Puberty
tree
is so
trunks,
weird.
And I
One
hadn't been to
scene.
Carlo Rambaldi's studio, so I thought, okay, here we are. We're doing this movie, and it's going to be this puppet, like this thing that doesn't even move. So then Henry worked with the actual one, and he told me how amazing it was, lifelike, but they would not let me see it. And Henry wouldn't tell me exactly what it looked like, because they had sworn him to secrecy.
Yeah. Stephen took me aside, because after I saw E.T., I used to draw all the time, and so I was drawing pictures of the creature. And Stephen was like, "Whoa,
Whoa, buddy.
NDA.
you can't do that. You can't show the other guys, like, you got to keep it a secret."
And
I
he
was like-
took it serious. He was
I was like, "Okay."
Yep. He was good at keeping it secret.
But did he use that in the movie? Because there's a part where you're doodling E.T.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
it was
right. Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that stuff, like with Elliot. The one thing that Stephen was really specific about with Elliot was you know, when Elliot's feigning illness to stay home from school, and he's doing the thermometer on the light bulb and all. That was all Stephen. You know, these were all tricks that he had tried or used or something when he was a kid.
In college.
In college. But all the stuff in the room, like me explaining all the toys, me talking about the fish and all that, that was all improv stuff. It wasn't scripted. It was
The Star Wars toys were yours.
The Star Wars toys
you
were mine,
brought them to
yeah.
the set and would play with them, you know, because Empire Strikes Back had just come out right before Raiders, I think, or right after.
Yeah, and I was a huge Star Wars fan at that point, and yeah, so all of that stuff, that was all stuff that Stephen had said, oh, we're gonna get Henry talking about Star Wars. We're gonna get, you know, explain this, explain that, and you know, it was like faster, faster, and shouting out things, but a lot of the other stuff was Steven Spielbergism, you know, childhood stuff.
The other scene that was improvised that was really brilliant, it's one of the biggest laughs in the movie, is it wasn't in the script, was where you see all the stuffed animals in the closet. And that was all Jim Bissell, that was the production designer, had all these stuffed animals in there. And E.T.'s he was hiding in the closet, but the scene where you actually see him and he's frozen when Mary discovers him was a sort of on the spot thing.
That's awesome.
And it's one of the biggest laughs in the movie.
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of why the magic and why the film endures? Because a lot of directors, it's like, say your lines and don't bump into the furniture, you know, or this is how I storyboarded and this is how we're going to shoot it. That Stephen was so open to the improv and what you could bring to it from your own lives. It sounds like that is a big part of the magic.
That's a good director.
Yeah.
That's a good director, and that's a good filmmaker.
And no,
because
I don't think it was because of that. I think it's because Melissa Matheson and Carlo Rambaldi put together love on the screen. And it just reaches into people's hearts and bypasses all the blocks that are set up. And, you know, it really is our Wizard of Oz, isn't it? It's our generation's Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
Matthew, what were the biggest challenges for you, obviously, as someone, you were new to all this, and you were being asked to do some complicated moves in a prosthetic that was bulky, and just what was your experience like?
Back then, it would be better today because back then the latex recipe was terrible. So when it got moist, it shrank. And so every successive time they put the E.T. torso on me, it was tighter and tighter. So that was probably my biggest challenge. And that's why the costume was so hot, because the smaller it got, the less porous it was. So it, you know. But enough of me bitching about how hot the costume
By the
was.
way, you never complained. You say you'd be better now, but you never complained back then.
Thank you. I know. Sometimes
Never
it just
did.
bubbles up, you know. I can't. But anyway.
Old resentment.
I was wondering, because I feel like I was lucky to get direct directions from Spielberg because I was on the effects crew. And isn't there like some rule where directors can only direct the actors today? Or
But I remember on more than one occasion, like watching Stephen push a camera operator off of the camera and get on it himself.
Yeah.
you
He
know?
got in a little trouble with the union on that one.
He did, yeah.
But
Yeah, but he wanted, I mean, that was the other thing. He wanted to control every aspect of it, and you know,
It's
if
his baby.
if he were able to do every job on set, none of us would have been there. Like, honestly, like that would have been the perfect, you know, incarnation of filmmaking for Stephen.
I was
Playing
lucky.
your parts?
I was lucky because I was
doing everything.
I was able to improv too, and I got feedback from him, which is awesome. Like, you'll notice after E.T. gets hammered, there's like certain stages of drunk. You know, you're having a really good time, but then there's the come down where you're just angry and pissed. And so when I was coming from behind the TV, I started kicking the beer cans. Like I was in
Yes.
the angry phase. And Spielberg gave me a compliment on it. He said that was a good improv.
See?
You were
Another
11 years
moment of
old. What was your
magic.
experience? What were you drawing from?
I know, right? Don't ask.
From an outside perspective, I think Matt was initially hired to do sort of the stunts, the drunken and falling down and stuff, and they would set up for that, and then he ended up taking over and doing the majority of the work, like all of the scenes where he's walking around. You know, and I think that happened because he was the most capable and the most, you know, the iconic walk, the way E.T. walks, that's Matt. That's totally Matt. And it wasn't before he came into the picture, because he came in late to the picture. There were several other people they tried, and it, you know, very uncomfortable in the suit, and somebody had health problems. But once Matt started doing the stunts, then they ended up using him more and more. And you know, he's a big part of why E.T. is E.T., along with Caprice Roth, who did she was a mime, and she did the hands. And a lot of E.T.'s elegant moves with his hands, that's because of her. So when I see E.T., it's like I have love, because I have love for the way that Matt added to the character and the way Caprice added to the character.
Yeah, E.T. is like a composite character. It's like, you
And
know,
the
it's
voice.
the robot, it's Caprice, it's me, and it all seamlessly works together, and most people buy it.
Yeah, it's never inhuman because it was humans doing it.
I want to ask you about that, because you talk about the composite of E.T. creating this character that lived and breathed and that we immortalized themselves in cinema. Was Deborah Winger just added in post, or was it the script supervisor who was giving you lines, or was she doing the dialogue, and what were the challenges for that?
We never heard the voice of E.T. that's in production until we saw it in the theaters. I would hear a chorus of the 13 operators who were across the stage, as, you know, via closed circuit television, watching the articulation, and kind of they would sound out the lines as they did. So it would be like 12 guys going, "Ouch," you know, and that's what we had to go off of. But like Matt was saying about the composite aspect, Caprice was always lying right underneath the frame and kind of putting her hands there. So there were a pair of human eyes I had to connect with down there for the emotional scenes, which really made a huge difference when you're working with essentially a puppet. And, you know, of course he was expressive and you would see the things, but, you know, like I was constantly aware of all the noises, like you know, it was mechanical. So when E.T. would go to speak, you would hear the cables dragging through the sleeves, and
you'd hear whirring, like a whirring kind of
hear
sound of
the servos whirring
servos,
and whatever
yes.
as they're like doing the remotes. So it could potentially be very distracting and kind of performance killing, but it was always attached to a human being. Like if Matt was in the suit, or if Caprice's hands were there, or if I could
Pat
hear the
Bailon.
operators, or Pat Bailon, or yeah.
Caprice should have got hazard pay though, because like the scene where he's picking out from the fridge, and she was underneath that, so she's getting potato salad, beer, milk, all this stuff dripped. Remember that? Yeah. She was always like under that stuff, getting stuff dripped down on her.
Henry, you'd mentioned that you got in trouble for sketching E.T. What's so interesting about that people don't remember now, especially younger audiences, that campaign, that teaser campaign, it showed clouds, right? And everyone was saying this movie was not going to work. Sony had famously given up the script to Universal because they didn't think it was going to work. People were criticized. They said, oh yeah, Poltergeist is going to be big for Spielberg, but this little alien thing, not going to do anything, right? Of course, it became biggest movie of all time. I'd love to hear about your first experiences seeing it. I know, Dee, you had an interesting experience because, of course, you saw it at Black Tower, only to then go see it again at the Cinerama Dome. I wonder if you can
like
talk about
two
it.
different worlds. Well, you never want to see a movie with the suits because somebody's always working for somebody else in the room and they're afraid to react in case their boss doesn't react the same way. So I went home and said to my husband, I think my career's over. They hated it. He said, come on, I'm going to take you. We're going to go down and watch it at the Cinerama Dome. So, of course, people were lined up around, the blocks. And we went in and people were crying and laughing and applauding. And he looked over. He'd been in the business a lot longer than me. And he looked over at me. What do you think now, Pupper? You think it's over? Smart ass.
What about you, Henry? What was it like seeing it for the first time?
Yeah, so I went to, I'm from outside of San Antonio, Texas, and I was still living in Texas, at that time. And I went to the premiere in Houston for it, and Kathy Kennedy was there. And I sat down and I watched it with an audience, and that was the first time I had seen it. But to see it with an audience and, all the beats, everybody got them and everybody was, and the music.
And
the music, really is another character in the film, and a very important one because Robert's experience of seeing it for the first time, he saw it without the score.
I saw a rough cut, black and white, without the score, and it was a great movie. I mean, it was still, but really more intimate and personal without the music. It seemed like it was very different. And then I did see another version with the music without an audience. I don't know how or why that happened, but so then I was thrilled, and I went home, but I still wasn't allowed to talk about it. And I was riding my bike around Irvine, California, where I lived, and humming the music in my head. But I still was a secret. I still couldn't talk about it. It was still top secret. But it was very different without the music.
Were you able to see the dailies while you were filming?
Never.
No, never.
That was just the
Never.
production, or like Spielberg?
I don't think we ever had the option, but I learned real early on when I did TV movies before that. And one of them, they allowed me to see the dailies, and it was the worst thing I ever did.
I never watched
No,
it.
It's like
Ever.
reading reviews of your performance when you're doing a play. You never want to change what you're doing because of what somebody else thinks or how it looks to you.
Yeah.
Before
Well,
it's
and
even,
you start watching yourself,
yeah.
and you start watching what
Tinkering.
you do when you're acting, when you've seen at least I do after dailies.
I only did it. I watched the dailies once when I was doing a TV movie, and then never, ever, ever again.
Well, I know we only have a few minutes, so I'm sure there are a ton of questions out there. There's a mic over there. If you want to go line up.
And there's a mic up here.
And
Come on, ask us
ask
some
your
good
question.
shit.
Don't be shy.
Come on.
And while they're lining up, Matthew, what was your experience seeing it like for the first time? And how did you see the movie when you saw it, and what was your
I don't remember
takeaway?
going to a huge premiere. I went to some kind of premiere, though, because I don't remember seeing you there. I remember seeing...
I wasn't.
Yeah.
I wasn't at the LA. I didn't ever go to the LA, any of the LA events.
Yeah,
was in
I
Vermont
saw it on the
when it came
Universal
out.
lot for some reason, though. There was some special screening. But anyway, so my family was with me. They'd actually sent a limousine for us to get there. That was kind of special. It was my first time.
I had to drive.
You had to drive? Yeah. All right. Come. I'm sorry. There was room for you, too.
Okay.
But yeah, so the first time I saw it, I'd never read the script. I didn't know all the. I wasn't there when E.T. died or anything, so I wasn't anticipating all those emotional points. So it was fresh for me, and I got a lump in my throat just like everybody else. So it's a special film if you're on the set and it still packs an emotional wallop.
Okay, well, I see there are a lot of people over there, so let's try and blast through questions.
Such a great movie, such a fun time, and what a great cast. My question is for Robert. If I remember correctly, when you see E.T., you did like a Yoda impression.
Yes.
Can you still do it?
Oh, of course. That was Henry's idea, by the way, because it was in the
Nice.
script. The line was, "You have absolute power," and I was sort of doing a Yoda impression around Henry because I had taped the Dr. Demento show off of the radio on a cassette tape, and he did Weird Al had sent his Yoda song in, and Henry just had all those toys and everything. He loved Star Wars, so when we got to that scene, he said, "That sounds like something Yoda would say," and so. So I said, "You have absolute power." Yes. The laugh sells it because Yoda could crack himself up. It was so cute.
Watch out, Frank Oz. Yep.
Not as cute as Baby Yoda, though. That thing is like, that's just not fair.
All right, there's a kid here.
Everybody has a favorite part. What's yours?
Which was your favorite part?
Everybody has a favorite part.
Oh, what is yours?
My favorite part's when I read Peter Pan to Gertie.
That's a beautiful scene.
My favorite part is when Elliot's trying to get into the D&D game and he gets sent outside to get pizza and rolls the ball into the shed. Yeah.
My favorite part, the part that gets me every time, and I think it's so beautifully filmed, is the scene where Henry, through the window, is talking to E.T. and just basically pouring his heart out and saying, "I don't know how to feel anymore." Come on, it's not only Henry's performance, which is just amazing, but it's the shot. It's just like a Kubrick shot.
My favorite part was when Tommy Howell tells Henry to go out and get the pizza and tells him no fishies when it's already cooked. So how is he going to have any control over that? Stupid. So stupid.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Next question.
So, Dee, I'm a huge fan of your career because every time I'm a huge fan of basically unknown horror movies, and I've noticed that every time I pick up an unknown horror movie, your name is in the credits. One name
And a lot of well-known ones, too. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right.
See, one name you seem to be associated with is Rob Zombie.
Oh, yeah.
I
I've done
was wondering
5
if
films
you
with Rob.
could explain your relationship with Rob Zombie, and if you're a fan of his writing, if you're a fan of his music.
I'm a big fan of Rob, period. And he's a great director. He's exactly what we've been talking about. He knows exactly what he wants, and then he's open to all the magic. And let me tell you, Scout Taylor Compton and I, and Sherry and I, if you've seen the part of Greta, he's just open to wherever you need to go or the character wants to go. And I love the guy.
And all his movies are about love, too.
Oh, yeah. Or the lack of.
This is going to have to be the last question. I'm sorry.
This is for Robert. At the end of the show, when Elliot's running down to tell you E.T. is still alive, you jump. Did you mean to hit your head? Was that in the script? And if
I'm
so, is there
really
anything
proud
else
of
like
that. Thanks for bringing that up, and I'll pay you when you're. No, there's nothing there. It was just a soundstage up, and so that to me is like actual work. Like I mimed. It was Stephen's idea. He said, "Jump and hit your head," but there was nothing to hit my head on. So my mime training, my whole month of mime training at South Coast Repertory paid off. So I mimed hitting my head.
Great job.
And yeah, thank you. That was actual pretend acting work.
And probably the weirdest question we've ever gotten.
Very good.
Well, before we thank everyone, as is tradition at Nightmare Weekend, they're going to take a giant group selfie. The cast is going to line up. You'll be behind them by the stage. But thank you to everyone, to Dee, Henry, Robert,
Thank you, guys.
and
Thanks for
Matthew.
coming
This
out.
was great.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you all for coming.
Baby doll, get up there.